accomplished in kickboxing, certainly worth exploring. So today we'll look at the anatomy and the biomechanics behind what makes Izzy such an uncanny striker. The first idea that we're going to explore is muscle attachments. And I want to start off at the very beginning by saying that just because I suspect this to be a factor, I don't know for sure. And quite frankly, it's impossible to know for sure how much this may or may not contribute to his ability to produce power. When I did my video on Alex Pereira, I also mentioned this, and I think some of you thought that that was me trying to attribute all of his power to this. This is a hypothetical situation, and this lesson is really just to provide some theoretical insight into how muscle attachments can play a role in more lengthy athletes. So this is the clip from the Pereira video that I did. The math is the same, just take Pereira's name and replace it with Izzy's. Hopefully it'll help you understand a little bit more about how muscle attachments can affect striking. If you've seen it, you can just skip over it. All right, so following up with the example with the bicep represents a third-class lever in the body, okay? So let's just kind of make sure that we're oriented. This fulcrum here would be the bend in your arm. The W stands for the weight, so you'd be holding a weight here. The length 1, noted down here, would be the length of your forearm, and then length 2 would be the length or the length of the distance between the fulcrum of the forearm and your muscle attachment, okay? And then the force is what we're going to calculate, or what we'll see down here. So essentially, we're going to see how the second length, the length of the muscle attachment affects how much force we need to produce to move the same amount of weight. So for down here, we have weight at 20 pounds, right? So we're doing a 20-pound bicep curl. And since Pereira and Hill had the same exact wingspan, they were the same exact height, I don't think this is a super far off thing to consider, okay? So known distance 1, the length of the forearm, we're just gonna put 18 inches, was about 1.5 feet. This is just an arbitrary guess, but we're gonna keep these things the same. What we're gonna change is the length. Okay, so this would represent the muscle attachment. So let's say Jamal Hill had a bicep tendon that attached 2.5 inches away from the elbow, okay, or the fulcrum. So if we hit calculate, that means that it would be 144 pounds of force created by the bicep in order to lift a 20-pound weight, all right? So let's say that if we increase this by just 1/2 inch, okay, which is pretty long distance whenever it comes to anatomical distances, but let's just say 1/2 inch, all right, so 3 inches, and then we'll hit calculate. Now only 120 pounds of force is needed to lift the same amount of weight. So we can see that if we just change this a little bit, right, and this is just one muscle, if he's got genetically good muscle attachments, this can account for all the muscles that are used in the upper and lower body and the trunk to produce force for Pereira, okay? So length, the further away the force is from the fulcrum, the less force is used or is needed to lift the same amount of weight. So think about it. Pereira and Hill could be using the same amount of force whenever they do some of these things. Athleticism aside and coordination aside, it's going to feel very different if all of the muscles have a little bit better of a muscle attachment. He's got much more leverage when he produces force. And that is how leverage and muscle attachments can affect the amount of force that you're putting through a certain limb in the body, like during a punch. Now the second principle I want to focus on with Izzy has to do with his length. And this time we're going to look at a body kick against Pereira first, so that we can better visualize the biomechanical principle at play afterwards. So again, the principle we're going to talk about is length, and we're going to break down this video or this view the way that we usually do. This is a roundhouse kick. I've done it before, but we're going to go through the biomechanics of what makes a good roundhouse kick, or what makes an effective roundhouse kick. Seemingly, there's no perfect kick, but the characteristics that seem to be in a lot of good roundhouse kicks. And then we're going to go into some, another mathematical demonstration about how the length actually plays a role in torque or power production. All right, so just very briefly, we see here that he externally rotates his bottom leg, or his leg that he's shifting his weight to, opening that right hip up to be able to rotate and swing his other leg through. Okay, so the external rotation of the bottom leg, he shifts his weight over. As he does that, he's doing a really good job already of dissociating the shoulder and the hips, something we've talked about and athletic individuals seem to do pretty well. He's also gearing up to use his arms as a counter movement to create a better whipping effect and get a little bit more torque on that rotational axis. His hip flexors are starting to become a little bit more concentrically active after taking advantage of that stretch, shorten cycle from the extended hip position on the left. As he leans back, he's going to start abducting his hips using muscles like the TFL and the gluteus medius, as he rotates his bottom leg, his adductors are eccentrically elongating to help stabilize that as he leans away. Not to mention, he's actually crunching a little bit more towards than we usually see. We typically see people lean a little bit further to get a little bit higher, particularly if you're trying to head kick. But he's rotating his lumbopelvic and thoracic region to the right, but he's actually crunching down laterally to the left using the obliques, quadratus lumborum, iliocostalis lumborum, etc. And with really good timing, he forcefully contracts his quads and makes contact on the flank. Really good shot there. So we'll look at it one more time, full speed, and then, super fast. And then we're going to look at just how much length plays a factor whenever it comes to torque and power production. So we're going to use this simple calculator that I found, just a force and lever arm length to torque calculator. Okay, it's very simple. We can derive force and we can derive torque in other ways, but really just to paint a picture of how the length can influence the torque if all things are equal. So we noticed that, and by the way, torque is just like a twisting, turning force that is typically happening about an axis. So in the case of the roundhouse kick, it would be in what we call the transverse plane, or essentially just kind of imagine it down the axis of the spine where you're rotating about it. I know he's kind of angled to the side, but we're going to keep things simple for now. I'll try to have a little diagram here to kind of show what I'm talking about, if I can figure out a way to edit that in. But let's just say that you've got somebody with Izzy's leg length, and you've got it's producing the same amount of force with their muscles towards a certain object. Okay, they're going to make contact with the same object, and then the force is applied in the same spot on the leg. So the muscle attachments relative to their length are equal. And they're going to be producing the same amount of force. We're just going to say 5 newtons. Now, the length, we'll just say Izzy's leg is 3 feet long. Okay, probably, maybe, but let's just say 3 feet long. So that would be 15 newtons, or 15 newton feet of torque about that axis, provided everything is equal in the athlete. If you decrease that and say 1.5, let's just say it's half of Izzy's leg size, a shorter athlete, you get 7.5 newton feet. So we see that just by decreasing the length with the same amount of force, so a smaller athlete with relative proportional muscle attachments producing the same force would still produce less torque, since the lever arm, or the length of the leg, is longer. And that's what I think makes Izzy and, quite frankly, Pereira so dangerous, is because they have such longer legs. They're pretty strong individuals, and the amount of torque that they can produce through that rotational axis is just really, really strong. Now, the third and most obvious aspect is Izzy's athleticism. Athleticism in itself is incredibly hard to define, so I'm not going to pretend to be able to give you a concrete definition, but what I can say is that most of us know it when we see it. In my humble opinion, a characteristic of athleticism is being able to control your body well in space. In this next clip, Izzy does a very good job of striking really well, while his body isn't necessarily in the ideal position to do so. Okay, so he's got a right and a left, but let's break down what makes it so special. He finds himself in a situation where he's actually leaning away, right? And this is where the length also comes into play as well. So his lead leg is already really, really close. He's leaning back, which is not something that we typically see in really hard knockout punches, but now this view kind of starts in a weird spot, but we'll see it much better when he comes with the left. But look how far back he's leaning, because he knows that his arm is going to be at a mechanically advantaged position if he does. Now, so he's shifting his weight over to the left as he does this, and he's done all the things we've talked about before, right? His arm is lagging behind, the pec major and his anterior delt are elongated, and then they're whipping through with that concentric contraction and that good thoracic rotation. Now, this is really happens here. I mean, this dude looks like he's in the Matrix. He's so athletic. So not only is he on his back leg, he's deliberately going onto his back leg. Not only is he not using rotation towards his opponent, He's actually using rotation coming across his opponent, and his spine is extended. We typically don't see this amount of extension whenever we talk about, or we're breaking down like Ryan Garcia, or we're breaking down Beterbiev or Pereira. We don't see them leaning this far away because you want all of your force to be kind of moving towards your opponent at the same time. But here, this can only be explained through athleticism, right? And I want you to just briefly watch his hips right here. So they already turned. This is a very good angle to show the dissociation between the hip line and the shoulder line. So this is creating a ton of torque, or potential torque, right? And he starts to, right there. Look how far back, this is shoulder adduction and scapular medial, I guess you could call it rotation, some medial glide of the scapula. Right, so there's a good isometric contraction in muscles like the rhomboids in the middle trap, keeping that shoulder girdle nice and stable. But I mean, talk about the stretch shorten cycle. Look at how far his anterior delt and pec are stretched here. I mean, this whipping effect is just unbelievable. So his spine is extended, his weight's on his back leg. He did get a good hip shoulder dissociation, but as that arm comes through, even though he made contact right on the button, I mean, how many strikers in the UFC do you know that could have managed the distance like this, right? I mean, yeah, he hit him right where he needed to, but he still wasn't even producing half of the amount of force and torque that he could have if he were setting up a punch the way that you would stereotypically set up a left hook. But this just goes to show that the kinesthetic awareness of certain fighters is just way better than others. And I think Izzy is one of those fighters, love him or hate him, just his raw athleticism gets him to places that other fighters probably can't go. Just a couple more things before we end. Analyzing movement of really simple inanimate objects is a super complex task. So once you start to incorporate human biology into the situation, it becomes almost impossible to do accurately. We can use motion sensors, force plates, joint angle detection, but even these don't really stack up to the seemingly infinite amount of variables that are presented. This breakdown is simply just provide a glimpse into what movement analysts are thinking about when they look at these things. I know we didn't touch on timing or muscle fiber type, but if I tried to account for all the variables in every video, I would still be making the first video. Keep those suggestions coming down in the comments. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.